You've been doing the work. Not the surface level work, the real work. You've gotten honest about your purpose, you've looked at the beliefs that built the old version of you, you've named the identity gap and started closing it. You've done the desired excavation, and you know what you're actually calling in. And something is still stalling. Not everything. Things are moving. There's evidence of progress. But there's also a specific thing, the thing you've been calling in most consistently, most clearly, with the most genuine alignment work behind it. And it keeps arriving, almost. Getting close and not quite landing, starting to form and then dissolving, showing up in partial versions of itself, that it feels like teasers rather than the real thing. And you're starting to wonder, what am I missing? Am I doing everything I know to do? I believe it. I've worked on the identity. I'm taking action. So why does it keep stalling? Today, I'm going to tell you exactly why. And more importantly, exactly where the gap is so you can close it. Because the stall is not random. It is diagnostic. And once you understand what it's telling you, it stops being frustrating and starts being useful. So, welcome back to the Purpose Over Paycheck podcast. I'm Troy, and we are in this episode. This is number 3 of 5 for the manifestation and alignment theme. In our last episode, we established manifestation is identity work, that you cannot consistently call in what you are not aligned with, and that alignment operates at 3 levels: belief, identity, and action. We've also went into desire, the real desire underneath the goal, the feeling you're actually calling in, and the practice of building a filling bridge to access the state now rather than waiting for the goal to confirm. Today, we are going into the gaps, the specific places where alignment breaks down, the 3 reasons that even people who are genuinely doing the work, who believe, who have done the identity work, who are taking action, still find their manifestation stalling. I want to be clear about something before we go in. If your manifestation has been stalling, it does not mean you're doing it wrong. It does not mean you're not spiritually evolved enough or vibrationally high enough or deserving enough. It means there is a specific identifiable misalignment somewhere in the system. And once you find it, you can address it directly. That's what today is for. Let's find your gap. Before I name 3 alignment gaps, I want to reframe what a manifestation stall actually is, because I think most people read it as a failure, as evidence that the practice isn't working, or that they aren't capable of calling in what they want, or that the universe has decided this particular thing isn't for them. That is almost never what a stall is. A stall is feedback. It is the system, your inner system, the field of alignment and action and belief, telling you that something is not yet coherent, that there is a gap somewhere between what you're consciously calling in and what you're actually broadcasting at the deeper levels where manifestation operates. Think about it physically for a moment. If you're trying to drive somewhere and you press the accelerator, but the car doesn't move the way you expect, you don't conclude that driving is impossible. You diagnose. Is it the engine? The transmission? Is the parking brake still on? You look for the specific point of friction, because knowing where the resistance is tells you exactly what to address. A manifestation stall works the same way. Something is creating friction between the intention and the results. And the friction is almost always at one of three specific points, three alignment gaps that are consistent enough across the peoples I've coached that I can now name them clearly and help someone identify which one is active in their particular situation. So, approach this episode not as a diagnosis of what's wrong with you, but as a diagnostic tool for what's happening in the system. The stall is not a verdict, it is a clue. Here we go. Alignment gap number one is the belief contradiction. And it is, in my experience, the most common reason manifestations stall, and the hardest to see clearly because it operates at a level below conscious awareness. Here's what a belief contradiction looks like. On the conscious level, you are fully committed to what you're calling in. You believe in it. You want it. You're working toward it. But underneath that conscious commitment, at the subconscious level, where your nervous system runs its real programming, there is a contradicting belief. A belief that the thing you're calling in is not actually available to you, or that getting it will cost you something you're not willing to pay. Or the version of you who has it is not someone you actually want to be. And that contradicting belief doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. In fact, the most disruptive ones are almost silent. They run in the background as a kind of felt sense, a low-grade resistance that you can't always put words, but that your body registers as, this isn't for me. This doesn't quite fit. I'm reaching for something that isn't in my lane. The belief contradiction shows up in the manifestation as things starting but not completing. Opportunities arrive and then dissolving. Progress happening and then reversing. The thing getting close and then something, usually something that looks like external circumstances, pulling it back just before it fully lands. And the external circumstance is real, but it's the cause. It's the expression of the contradicting belief finding a route into reality. The subconscious is remarkably creative at finding ways to produce outcomes that are consistent with its programming, even when the conscious mind is trying to override it. How do you close this gap? We can go back to one of our episodes, the belief episode. The belief work is the foundation. Specifically, ask yourself this: do I have any fears or resistance around actually having the thing I'm calling in? Not around getting it, around having it, sustaining it, living as the person who has it permanently. Because the belief contradiction is often not about whether you can achieve the goal, it's about whether you believe you can keep it. Whether you believe you deserve it at the level of your permanent reality rather than as a lucky break. Whether the version of you who lives there permanently is someone you recognize and trust. Find the contradiction, name it, and then apply the evidence-building practice from the episode that we talked about, one real lived action at a time, until the new belief has a much experimental weight as the old one. Alignment gap number 2 is what I call the identity lag. And this one is particularly common for people who have been doing the inner work, who have done meaningful belief work, and have a genuine growing sense of what's possible for them, but whose day-to-day self-concept hasn't fully caught up to the level they're calling in. Here's the distinction. Belief work tells you what's possible. Identity work tells you who is capable of receiving it, and there can be a gap between those two things. A lag, where you genuinely believe the gap is achievable for someone, while still not fully inhibiting the version of yourself who that someone is. The identity lag shows up in the specific ways. You get the opportunity and feel a rush of imposter syndrome, the sense that you've somehow fooled someone into thinking you're further along than you are. You received a compliment or a recognition and immediate deflect it rather than letting it land. You're offered the thing you've been calling in, and your first internal response is not excitement, but something closer to panic, a scrambling to prove you belong there. Those responses are not evidence that you don't belong there. They are evidence that the external reality is arriving faster than the identity has expanded to meet it. The manifestation is working. The lag is the being, not in the calling in. The lag creates its own kind of stall because when the opportunity arrives and the identity hasn't caught up, there's a subtle, sometimes not so subtle, inability to fully receive it. You shrink from it slightly, you over explain yourself, you negotiate yourself down to what was offered, you find reasons why the timing isn't quite right, and the opportunity, which was real and aligned, slips because the version of you is greeting it wasn't yet the version who could hold it. The fix for the identity lag is the be before you do practice from one of our episodes. The 3 questions. What does the next level version of me believe about themselves? How do they make decisions? What have they decided is non-negotiable? And then, critically, making one decision this week from the identity rather than from the current one. The identity catches up through action taken as the next level version of yourself, not through more preparation, through doing as the person before you fully feel like that person, and letting the feeling flow the action rather than waiting for the feeling to precede it. Close the gap, close the lag. The thing you're calling in is arriving. Make sure the version of you greeting it can actually hold it. Alignment gap number 3 is the action mismatch. And this is one of the most that people are sometimes most resistant to hearing because it requires looking honestly at whether the way you're actually spending your time, energy, and decisions is coherent with what you're calling in. Here's the truth about action and manifestation that I think gets lost in a lot of the spiritual teaching. The universe, or your subconscious, or the field of aligned opportunity, reads your actions as your real intention, not your stated attention, not your enacted intention. What you actually do consistently with your time and your attention and your choices. That is the loudest signal you're sending out about what you're genuinely committed to. And if your actions are still primarily those of the person you were before the purpose work, before the identity work, before the belief work, then regardless of how you clear your vision is, or how clear your vision is, and how aligned your inner state feels, the outer expression of your life is broadcasting something consistent with what you're calling in. Here's what the action mismatch looks like in practice. You say you're calling in a thriving coaching practice, but your calendar still has 0 dedicated time for client development, content creation, or building the visibility that practice requires. You say you're calling in financial freedom, but your spending patterns, your price decision, your relationship with money on a Tuesday afternoon still reflects the scarcity programming you've been working to dismantle. You say you're calling in a relationship built on genuine depth and authenticity, but you're still spending most of your social energy in environments and interactions that reward performance over presence. The mismatch doesn't mean you're not serious. It usually means the inner work has moved faster than the outer expression has caught up. And that gap between who you've become internally and how your life is still organized externally is where the stall lives. Closing the action mismatch requires the color-coded calendar exercise that we did in one of our episodes. The one where you look honestly at your actual week and assess how much of it is genuinely organized around what you're building versus the legacy patterns of who you were. And then making one structural change, not a completely overhaul, one deliberate shift in how your time is organized that signals through action that your life is being lived by the next level version of you. Because here's what I found. When all three levels, belief, identity, and action, are pointed in the same direction, the stall resolves. Not overnight, but the friction decreases noticeably. Things that were almost arriving start landing. Opportunities that were showing up in partial forms start completing themselves. The thing you've been calling in starts feeling less like a reach and more like an inevitability. That's coherence. That's what manifestation actually feels like when it's working. Okay. Whew. Let's make this concrete. I'm going to give you a diagnostic, a set of questions designed to help you identify which of the three gaps is the most active in your manifestation right now. And I want you to answer these questions honestly, not aspirationally. Diagnostic for gap one, the belief contradiction. Sit quietly with what you're calling in. Hold it in your mind fully, and then notice. Is there any part of you that doesn't fully believe that this is yours? No doubt, not doubts about how it arrives, doubts about whether you ultimately get to have it. Is there a quiet voice that says things like, people like me don't usually hold on to things like this, or I've gotten close before and it didn't last, or I'm not sure I'd know what to do with it if it actually arrived? If you hear any version of those voices, gap one is active. Diagnostic for gap two, the identity lag. Think about the last time an opportunity arrived that was close to what you've been calling in: a potential client, a collaboration, a recognition, an offer. What was your immediate internal response? Not the response you showed, the one you felt first before you managed it. Was there a spike of imposter syndrome, a rush to explain why you might not be the right fit, a strong urge to make yourself smaller than the opportunity? If yes, gap two is active. Diagnostic for gap three, the action mismatch. Look at your last full week, not the week you planned, the week you actually lived. How much of your time was genuinely organized around what you're building toward? How many decisions did you make that were coherent with the next level version of you? And how many defaulted to the patterns of the person you're in the process of growing past? If the honest answer is that the legacy patterns are still running most of your week, gap three is active. Most people will find that more than one gap is active. That's normal. The three levels are interconnected, and a gap in one tends to create gaps in the others. The question is not which one are there, but which one is primary. Which one, if you closed it first, would create the most movement in the others? In my experience, the primary gap is almost always belief, because belief is the foundation. Identity is built on top of belief, and action is an expression of identity. Address the belief gap first, and the others become significantly closer to close. But do the diagnostic honestly. Your specific situation may be different, and the goal is not to do the most dramatic work, it's to do the most targeted work. The one thing that creates the most movement in the direction of what you're calling in. So I want to share a specific story about diagnosing my own alignment gaps, because I think it illustrates how this works in real life, which is always messier and more humbling than a framework makes it sound. There was a season not long ago when I was calling in a specific level of growth in my coaching practice. I was clear on the vision, I had done the belief work, or so I thought. I was showing up consistently, taking action, creating content, having conversations. Everything looked aligned, action from the outside. And things were moving slowly. Gains that felt proportionally to a fraction of the effort I was putting in. And I kept refining the strategy, better messaging, more consistent posting, clearer offers, and the needle moved, but not with the ease I'd come to understand was the signal of genuine alignment. When I finally slowed down enough to do the diagnostic honestly, not the version where I told myself I was fine, the actual honest version, I found gap 2, the identity leg. What I discovered was that while I was genuinely believed that the growth was possible, I hadn't fully inhabited the version of myself who operated at that level as a permanent reality. I was still, in some small but significant way, making decisions from a slightly apologetic version of my own authority, still softening my conviction in conversations where I should have been leading, still giving discounts, not because the client needed them, but because some part of me wasn't fully settled in the value of what I was offering. The belief was there, the action was there, the identity, specifically around my own authority as someone who worked was genuinely worth what I was asking for, was lagging. When I addressed that specifically, not the strategy, not the content, but the specific identity work around authority and worth, things shifted. Not dramatically in a single week, but the friction decreased. The conversations went differently. The offers were received differently. The practice grew in a way that felt less like pushing and more like arriving. The gap was never the strategy. It was never the platform. It was the specific identity piece I hadn't fully closed. And once I could see it clearly, once I stopped looking at the external factors and started looking at the internal ones, I knew exactly what to work on. That's what finding the gap feels like. Not defeat, precision. And precision is far more useful than more effort. So here's what I want you to take away from today's episode. Your manifestation is not broken. Your practice is not failing. There is a gap. Specific, identifiable, closable. And finding it more valuable than any amount of additional effort applied to a misdiagnosis problem. Your activation this week is the diagnostic. Run all 3 sets of questions: belief, identity, action, and identify your primary gap. Write it down specifically. Not I'm having limiting beliefs. Which specific belief is contradicting what you're calling in? Not my identity needs work. Which specific identity piece is lagging behind where your manifestation is trying to go? Not my actions are misaligned. Which specific pattern in your actual week is most inconsistent with the next level version of you? Specific, named, written down. And then, just one thing, one targeted action this week that addresses the primary gap directly, not the whole system. The primary gap, one thing. In our next episode, and it's the one that takes everything we've built and moves it into embodiment, living as if it's already done, not performing it, not pretending, actually inhabiting the frequency of the next level now in your current life and the current circumstances. That's where we're going. All right, friend. I'm Troy. I am your master coach, manifesting mentor. This is the On to Over Purpose Paycheck podcast. Please make sure you're following. Leave a rating, leave a comment, share this episode out with anyone who needs to hear it, because when you share it out, you are changing lives and you are helping people find the identity gap, find and use the diagnostic tools that I've given today to help them reach the version that you are working on as well. Have a great one, my friend, and we will talk to you on the next episode.